Recording is on. Well, welcome everybody. This is week 5, book 5 of The Republic. And I think we just open it right up in terms of, is there stuff percolating over from last week? Is there stuff from the reading of this week? Like, what's on your minds?
Well, I can start. I enjoyed toward the end of book 5 when he started talking. Actually, before he got, let's see, toward the end when he was talking about knowledge and ignorance, and then opinion. And if you're not a philosopher, you probably don't have that good access to knowledge and truth, and if you're not completely ignorant, then my impression is what he's saying is you live mainly in a world of opinion where you make judgments and things are always changing. So for example, in talking about beauty, you probably don't have, the average person probably doesn't have the I think he refers to it as the power of beauty. But you can look at the sky and have an opinion. You can say the sky is beautiful, but you're using your senses to determine that. And an hour later, things change, and you could be saying the sky is not beautiful or the sky is not ugly. And so it just made me think that I'm floating around here in a world where I'm largely functioning with opinion, and that was my the thing I liked.
And you liked it, why?
Well, because I think a lot of us think we're more grounded, and we have knowledge, and things are much more definite, and it's not. Things are very fluid, and things change, and you have opinions, and things are not as fixed.
Okay. Others?
I'd love to spend a little time talking about how equality figures into what Socrates is describing. He certainly advocates the equal education for women, at least among the guardian class, though it's not clear he's really an egalitarian about the role of women in society in general. And also just the living arrangement of guardians, this whole idea of sharing, partners and children, and a very sort of prescribed way of living. And I guess the goal of that is that their duty will be focused on society rather than the more traditional family or tribal role. And I just wonder what other people.
For the guardians.
Guardians, right.
So do you want to say some more about that, or do you want us to, you got a passage you'd like to look at? Or
I just find it's an interesting grist for the discussion mill. If others find that interesting,
well, yes, why is it interesting? Like, who cares?
It strikes me as radical, and I don't know how practical it is. It's not practical, obviously, but I think he is.
What, to treat women as equal?
Not so much treat them as equal, but rather the arrangement of a lack of a family, the idea that you're sharing children. There are no romantic relationships for the guardian to be engaging in. They have specific times of the year around rituals when they are allowed to procreate. It's a transformation of what we might think of normally in nature.
Okay, but if I hear you correctly, and perhaps I don't, it sounds to me like you're mentioning two topics and maybe mixing the two topics together. Well, one
No,
is, what?
two topics for sure. The equal education of women is one topic, and then the living arrangements is the other.
Of the guardians is
Of
the
the guardian.
So why don't we take the latter one first and talk about the guardian. Maybe Ned, you can continue. Like, according to Socrates, what is the living situation of the guardian supposed to be like, and why?
According to Socrates, the guardians are to do without material wealth. They're not to be spending time accumulating material possessions and building their own wealth, nor are they to be living in traditional family situations. In fact, children born to the guardian class are meant to be shared by the collective of guardians. And it's not necessarily even to be clear whose children a particular generation might be associated with as parents. And there Socrates does talk about some cautionary conditions to avoid incest and things like that. That's sort of the proposal that he has for how the guardians will live.
In a kind of a communalism or a communism or some kind of, okay.
Which, as I read it, would prepare the guardians to focus on the task of defending the society, of ruling in the case of the guardians, and for the auxiliaries going and fighting. And it's not always clear is he talking about both guardians and auxiliaries. He sometimes conflates those two groups, and sometimes they're separate.
And also the term guardian has kind of migrated, I think, when they were first discussing the evolution of the city and decided they needed warriors, that those were labeled guardians initially, but that at some point that class kind of broke into two, and there became the ruling class, which is the guardians proper, as it were, and then the auxiliaries. Okay, but so Ned, but the logic here, the logic behind this communalism of the guardians is what now?
As I understand Socrates, he's arguing this will allow the guardians to rule more justly, act in the best interest of the society rather than of themselves, the sort of motives that most of us probably have of family and wealth, that those considerations will be put aside so they can focus on knowledge and ruling justly.
The guardians will have no private interests to conflict with their obligation to pursue the public interest.
Yes.
And that as soon as you've got your own stuff, and stuff includes your own woman or your own kids or anything that's mine, presumably there's the potential for a conflict of interest among the rulers. And best not to go down that path in the first place.
That's my reading of it, yes.
Okay, other folks?
Yeah, he says, Socrates says, he uses the expression my own. He says when people talk about my own in the world that he's creating, they're really talking about everybody in the guardian class, because my own would be all of the children, since they don't know really whose children belong to whom, whose women and whose men belong to whom. There's no property. So he says the worst thing that can happen in this society is for there to be any division or divisiveness. And this is a method whereby he will end the opportunity for divisiveness. When people say my own, they're talking about everyone.
But we're talking about the guardians only here.
We're talking about the guardians only, yep.
Not the city as a whole.
That's correct. And it's not really clear to me exactly, what the other members of the society are going to be able to do. He talks about the guardians are going to be able to have regular and encouraged to have regular and frequent sexual intercourse so that they create new guardians. And it almost sounds as though the other people aren't going to be allowed to do that, or going to be allowed to do that very much or as much. And that, you know, that the rulers will have to come up with a set of lies to make people feel that that's the right thing, you know, that this is set up in the right way, that the guardians are able to have much more sex than the other people are able to have.
So what's daily life for the guardians like, Nick?
Well, they're doing gymnastics and music. They're doing war when that's necessary.
Wait, so are the guardians fighting war? Are they warriors?
Yes. Yes. Yes, he
mean,
talks about the guardians, both men and women, would be involved in the war. They would go to war together. They would take their children to observe what they do, just as the potter's children observe the potter and learn how to become potters by, you know, sort of an apprenticeship with their parents, their father. The children would go to war with the guardians, mothers, women, and men. Yeah, so the guardians are fighting these wars.
So last week we had built up this chart, putting all these analogies side by side, the metals and the classes of the city and the types of individual, or the dominant characteristics of the soul, or corresponding virtues. And I thought one of the things was that the three metals corresponding to the three classes of the city, and that the gold as the guardians, the silver as the auxiliaries or warriors or whatever they're called, and the bronze as the workers are the producers. So Nick, are you saying that you think this representation is not really quite accurate, or what's your sense here?
Well, he expands, Socrates expands it in Book 5 to include another layer, I guess, in the gold, or maybe even above the gold. And that's the philosopher king.
Okay, but we're not up to philosopher king yet. We're still talking about the guardians.
I don't know.
It's question you're at, just whether the idea of whether there's three classes in the city, each of which is specialized to a particular function, and that the warrior's specialized function is war, and the guardian's specialized function is ruling, and the worker's specialized function is producing things.
Well, again, as Ned was saying, it gets kind of muddled in terms of who's who, guardians, auxiliaries, and then later
You're accusing Socrates of muddled thinking. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's kind of muddled.
And that it's Socrates is doing.
Yes.
Yes. Yossi, you're mute.
I think there is a little bit of a question about if it's only the guardians, and the reason I'm saying it because he mentioned also that the ruler will do the, it's a lie that the intercourse, they will do like, איך אומרים, no, they will do like, who will get involved with what woman will go with what man, but they are doing it in kind of, איך אומרים הגרלה? Like
lottery.
A lottery, but this lottery is really going to be controlled by the gold people, you know? And my understanding for this is why they do it. It's probably maybe not just the second class is involved here, maybe it's also the lower class involved here, and they are artificially controlling it but it will be really just between classes.
We're talking about sex again?
It's just the the population, yes. Yes,
Okay.
so like the kids that will come, the new kids that will come, they should be still in the right class. So
Okay, I realize that Fernando?
So I just wanted to comment. I kind of agree with Nick's assessment that the Guardians do have some warrior capabilities to them. And maybe when you want to move on, that's fine. But I just, when he first started and we had initially two classes, the workers and the Guardians, and then the Guardians were split into auxiliaries and rulers. And it was from that original Guardian class, the most competent ones moved on to the ruler class. Those are the ones that were identified, with the gold star, if you will. So
And the gold medal.
the gold medal. Thank you. So it seems to me that the ruling class, the ones we're now calling Guardians, do have that capacity for warfare. And throughout book 5, he talks about the Guardians taking their children to observe war and, as Nick was pointing out, to, essentially as an apprenticeship kind of thing. So they must be warriors.
Well, so this goes back to,
I think their primary role, but they must have that.
so that goes back to, I think we were discussing at the end of last time, that whether or not as each of the higher metals has all of the virtues of the lower ones plus one more. So if we started from the bottom, whether that the bronze people, the worker bees, are dominated by desire, or the appetitive part of the soul, I think what Amy called the stomach at one point, and therefore the virtue of which the workers are capable is moderation. And that when we get to the silver, let's call them the warriors, even though originally they were called the guardians, so let's call them the warriors now, that their corresponding, their characteristic virtue, or the dominant aspect of their soul was spirit, or what Amy called the heart, and therefore their distinctive virtue was courage. But whether this meant they also were capable of moderation, because they were capable of and that when we get to the guardians at the top, their corresponding, the dominant part of their soul is reason, or the head, and their characteristic virtue is wisdom, but whether they also incorporate courage and moderation, everything from below. And I think, so we're back to the same question. First of all, is this a fair reading of the book? And if it's not, then obviously we should change the diagram. If it is, I presume it means everybody higher up, the guardians have the virtues that the workers have, but I don't know that means that they spend their day working, or that the guardians have the virtues that the warriors have. And, I mean, this is kind of an idealized thing, but like when war breaks out, whether their guardians are going to war either. I mean, whether the idea that the guardian's function is to rule, the producer's function is to produce, and the warrior's function is to defend, fight. And therefore how these fit together to make a city. And what's even more, well, I shouldn't say more important, but the reason they got here, we've talked about this a number of times, right, is that at some level, Socrates started talking about the city as an analogy to help us start thinking about an individual, right? And what is justice and injustice in the big letters, and then transferred back to the littler part. So if we were to talk about this in an individual, one single person, I presume there's some faculty in the individual that's responsible for appetite and for moderating the appetite. There's one part of the individual that's responsible for courage, spiritedness, and then courage. And there's some other part of the individual that's responsible for wisdom and governing the individual. And that Amy's thing about the head, the heart, and the stomach is it's a little community inside a single person. each part has a distinctive function. And when the three functions are in harmony, then we have all together now
Just,
justice. So Fernando, do you want to say something about that?
I'm not sure I can add anything to that right now.
Well, so I mean, just does it help us in any way, like whether in a city, whether the guardians are going out to fight, I guess is how we got in here.
I, I don't know.
Steve?
I think this is one of the places where the ineligible is useful but not perfect. I think the description you just made in terms of at the individual level, you have these three parts which are in juxtaposition, is a pretty good representation of both what Socrates says and what actually you can envision. I think it's trickier to talk about, I mean, I know that we originally had a little pie chart where we said, okay, the worker bees are primarily about desire, but they also have courage and wisdom. I'm not sure it says that. I'm not sure that it ever says that workers are capable of wisdom. Again, intuitively, we would say that because that's our experience.
So let me just, let's just be precise. Let me put the chart back up for 1 second, okay?
Yep.
So the three parts of the soul, I take it, were desire, spirit, and reason. And the corresponding virtues were moderation, courage, and wisdom. And I think the issue arose that is Socrates saying that the workers only have a one-part soul without the reason component and without the spirit component? And do the warriors just have a two-part soul without, you know, with the desire component and the spirit component, but not? So in a sense, are the guardians the only one with complete human souls? And I thought, and again, we can revise this, but I thought at the end of our discussion last time, the idea was that each of them has those components within their soul in a technical sense, but particular parts are more well developed, or the virtues of those parts of the soul are cultivated in the particular classes, so that the workers, yeah, in some technical sense, they have some degree of rationality and they have some degree of spirit perhaps, but they're never going to achieve courage and wisdom, even though they have the, you know, and so on and so on. So Steve, you want to?
That's a good way of thinking. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it's the cultivation then that makes the critical difference, because you have
and even the capability of cultivation, that
yes.
that the workers are not capable of having their reason cultivated. That's why they're workers.
Well, I'm not sure, does he actually make the distinction between capability and what you do? I mean, he postulates that to make the warrior class warriors, there are things we need to do. Obviously, they're said to be capable of being cultivated. So maybe it's the same thing.
I think we're back to the question of where do silver babies come from? I mean, what is a silver baby, or a bronze baby, or a gold baby, and where do they come from? And you know,
they come from others in their same class. But I don't think he ever, you know, he talks about selecting ones that might be aberrant and might have more capabilities or less capabilities.
But presumably then each individual has some level of capability that can be identified when they're young, and therefore they're nurtured accordingly.
Yep.
It would have to be for the city to be the analogy for the individual, because we're not talking about city of guardians, city of workers. It's a city that has all of them. Just like the individual has all those qualities, the question is simply which is dominant.
I have a question, Adam, about the soul of the worker. If that soul is in harmony, are you saying that if that soul is in harmony, then it is dominated by desire? Is that what we're saying?
Adam,
Yes.
on page 123, in book 4, it's 443 D and E. That's kind of a nice paragraph about the harmonizing of the parts of the soul.
Would you like to read it for us?
Okay. But in truth, justice was, as it seems, something of this sort. However, not with respect to a man's minding his external business, but with respect to what is within, with respect to what truly concerns him and his own. He doesn't let each part in him mind other people's business, or the three classes in the soul meddle with each other, but really sets his own house in good order and rules himself. He arranges himself, becomes his own friend, and harmonizes the three parts, exactly like three notes in a harmonic scale, lowest, highest, and middle. And if there are some other parts in between, he binds them together and becomes entirely one from many, moderate and harmonized. Then and only then he acts, if he does not act in some way, either concerning the acquisition of money or the care of the body or something political or concerning private contracts. In all these actions, he believes and names a just and fine action, one that preserves and helps to produce this condition, and wisdom, the knowledge that supervises this action, while he believes and names an unjust action, one that undoes this condition, and lack of learning in its turn, the opinion that supervises this action. So I think this makes it clear that everybody has three parts in their soul, the three parts that we identified and talked about, and that depending upon what is dominating, they get harmonized. At least that's how I read it.
Well, I think you have three different steps. I mean, one is if you're saying every human being has three parts to their soul.
Right, the three that we identified.
Okay. 2, different individuals have different parts of their soul dominating them.
Right.
3, in any case, if the three parts of a person's soul are in harmony, then there is internal justice.
Yes.
But I take it the internal harmony for a guardian would be somewhat different than the internal harmony of the warrior than the internal harmony of the worker, simply because you're mixing the three components in different proportions.
Correct.
In the three cases.
Correct. And then I think in book 5 on page 133, so that's 455, it's kind of a B and C.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where he makes the statement about how, we each have our own natures depending upon how we learn and how we retain that learning. He says, come now, we'll say to him, answer, is this what you meant? Did you distinguish between the man who has a good nature for a thing and another who has no nature for it on these grounds? The one learns something connected with that thing easily, the other with difficulty. The one, starting from slight learning, is able to carry discovery far forward in the field he has learned, while the other, having chanced on a lot of learning and practice, can't even preserve what he learned. And the bodily things give adequate service to the thought of the man with the good nature, while they oppose the thought of the other man. Are there any other things than these by which you distinguish the man who has a good nature for each discipline from the one who hasn't? So this kind of goes back to that. I mean, I think that speaks to the thing of, we each have our natures, whether we're gold, silver, or bronze, is the thing that we develop. But we have a little residual of all of them in us, and it's the harmonizing of those that produces our internal justice, and it's the harmonizing among the classes that produces the external justice.
Okay, so when we come to book 5, though, the question is whether book 5 is about all the different classes of the city, or whether the focus in book 5 is on the guardians in particular.
Well, this particular one that he's talking, this paragraph is part of the discussion about women guardians and about educating women who...
Women guardians.
It's guardians, but I mean, he's actually arguing from the point of view that women's nature and men's nature are totally different, and that women are not to be educated. So I thought this was
Socrates says women are not to be educated?
No, he says women guardians are to be educated, but what he's going back and saying is that the convention is that women's and men's nature are different. And for that reason, women wouldn't play roles in the different pieces of government, but that if you really look at the nature of someone, it's their ability to learn. And that ability is clear. Some people can learn and some people can't learn. Now, I took this to mean that this is part of, whether it's gold, silver, or bronze, you have these natures and one develops and the others develop less. So anyway.
Michelle?
I'm struggling since last week with the whole education piece, which I realized I was jumping the gun on last week, but I can't, understanding that we're talking about the guardians. Based on the chart, if there has to be balance in each of these 3 types of individuals, it's not only balance among reason, spirit, and desire, but looking at the worker class, the desire has to be tempered by the virtue of moderation.
Right.
Now, so I've come up with 3 ideas of how you get moderation. Either, maybe more than that. Either you're born with it, which clearly not everyone's going to be. You're taught it, or you imitate it, which we know we're not supposed to be imitating, or it's forced on you by a more powerful class. So I am hard-pressed to understand how the moderation piece is supposed to operate, A, and B, why I don't understand. It may not be the same form of education. It might that's being described for the guardian class, but I don't understand how there's no education process that's occurring for the worker class. That's what I'm stuck on.
What do you mean you don't understand it? You don't accept it, or you don't think that that's
No, I'm not sure that that's actually, you asked if the chart is absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm.
I'm having a hard time seeing how that's logical and could be correct.
Somebody want to respond to Michelle?
I could respond to the desire and moderation, at least what my thoughts are. Moderation is a combination of, well, it is the effect of spirit over desire. So you can't have just desire. You have to be able to say, I can't drink the next bottle of wine. I got 10 shoes to cobble tomorrow. And that is also a form of spirit. It's not the spirit that's going to have me pick up a sword and unhinge the warrior tomorrow, but it's at least enough to get me to not drink the next bottle of wine.
But that runs contrary to the chart.
Say it again, Michelle.
I don't think that's in keeping with your chart.
Or
I mean, I appreciate the idea, but because under this chart, reason and spirit are at a minimum in the worker if there's to be balance. But I don't think the balance is just the distribution of those 3 things. It's moderation that's going to that's going to temper the desires. It's not, I don't think it's one of the other, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is one of the other 2 attributes in whatever sparse amount a person has it. Where does the moderation come from is the question.
Is it a balancing of the desire to do something with the desire not to do something?
But where does that come from?
I don't know if Socrates says where it comes from, but the excellent management of desire is called moderation. The excellent.
You can't have an excellent, it's ridiculous. You can't have an excellent management of it just in a vacuum just because you yourself have excellent management of it, because then everybody would be, all these workers would be balanced, and I don't see how that's humanly possible.
First of all, nobody said balanced. I mean, we got a lot of, there's a lot of moving parts here, but I think the more we can keep them regimented together, the more it will help. So one is, I'll tell you what, let's back up a little bit and then we'll come back exactly here. Let's go to the end of book 4, page 125, 445D. I mean, as you know, just in case things are not complicated enough. And we're gonna make a new chart. Because I think one of the things, you know, I tried to start a different way today, but I think it's the same issue of trying to maintain consciousness of where they are in the story or where they are in the plot or what is actually real. I mean, there's a lot of things being talked about, but the question is, what's the focus of the discussion? And at the end of book 4, when we had this whole epiphany about the 3 parts of the city, the 3 parts of the individual, the 3 virtues, the 4th virtue being the harmonious relationship of the other 3. When they get to the end here of book 4, the next subject under discussion is supposed to be, Socrates says, there are 5 regimes and 5 of soul. I say that one type of regime would be the one we've described, but that it could be named in 2 ways. If one exceptional man arose among the rulers, it would be kingship, if more, an aristocracy. Now, I tell you that despite what the analogy they've just had, that now we've got a new thing going on here, that there's 5 types of regime, and there's 5 types of soul, and we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what's the name for type 1 regime?
It's a kingship or some other word like that.
An aristocracy.
And what's the difference between a king? He says these are 2 words for the same thing, really, but they differ in the number of people involved. Right?
5 regimes.
Is that fair?
5 regimes, 5 souls.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that aristocracy in this case should not be confused with like the British House of Lords or anything like this. That literally, technically, aristocracy means the good people, the best people. And if we have one best person, one good person running the show, that's a kingship. If we have a few good people running the show, that's an aristocracy. But in either case, it's the good people running the show of the city. This is one of 5 types of regime. And that Socrates, I think, proposes to go ahead and discuss this now, which takes us into book 5. So that the subject matter of book 5 has now narrowed down in a sense, I think, that the subject matter of book 5 is to discuss this. And then, you know, assuming Socrates is going to be systematic at some point, to discuss the other 4 and also the corresponding types of soul that go with that. So, Michelle, before we jump back to book 5 and to your thing, does this seem reasonable?
Yeah.
Other folks?
It's not me.
It's a dog.
Yeah, it's not my house.
Oh, really?
It's always me. No, it is not.
We
Okay.
believe you.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Adam.
So so this goes into the things we've been talking about since the beginning of class, that the focus of book 5, even though there's other people in the city, yada, 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 And there's something to be said about women in general, perhaps. The focus is discussing what the regime would be that's ruled by the best people, a city that's ruled by the best people, whether it's one person called the kingship or a few people called the aristocrats. Steve.
But,
Yeah, but don't they kind of get off
hijack
track?
the topic back though? Isn't
What?
that what, I mean, that is indeed what he starts out with.
Right, but
But isn't then there a pushback immediately from the group there saying, no, we're not going to let you off that easy. We want to go back and have you fill in the picture as regards women and children.
Okay, so excellent. So basically now they go into a couple of sidebars.
Yes.
Right? They kind of pause the main trajectory, and we're going to have a couple of sidebars about the city. Sidebar number 1
is women and their role.
And it's both in general, but I take it that it's particularly about women guardians. So for example, at on 134.
Right. Yeah. At the bottom of page 129, you make it really clear it's female guardians because they have the whole thing with the guardian dogs and things like that. Yep.
Right, and then but by the time we get to page 134, at 455D, Socrates says, therefore, my friend, there is no practice of a city's governors which belong to woman because she's woman, or to man because he's man. But the natures are scattered alike among both animals, and woman participates according to nature in all practices, and man in all. But in all of them, woman is weaker than man. Certainly. So shall we assign all of them to men and none to women? How could we? For I suppose there is, as we shall assert, one woman apt at medicine and another not, one woman apt at music and another unmusical by nature, of course. And isn't there then also one apt at gymnastic and at war, and another unwarlike and no lover of gymnastic? I suppose so. And what about this? Is there a lover of wisdom and a hater of wisdom, and one who is spirited and another without spirit? Yes, there are these two. There is therefore one woman fit for guarding and another not. Or wasn't it a nature of this sort we also selected for the men, fit for guarding? Certainly that was it. Men and women, therefore, also have the same nature with respect to guarding a city, except insofar as the one is weaker and the other stronger. It looks like it. Such women, therefore, must also be chosen to live and guard with such men, since they are competent and akin to the men in their nature. Certainly. And mustn't the same practices be assigned to the same natures? The same. Then we have come around full circle to where we were before and agree it's not against nature to assign music and gymnastics to the women guardians. That's entirely certain. Then we weren't giving laws that are impossible, or like prayers, since the law we were setting down is according to nature. Rather, the way things are nowadays proves to be, as it seems, against nature. So it seems. So Steve, do you also want to say something about this passage, or what's?
No, I mean, I just see it as a sidebar from the central topic that he teed up at the end of book 4. It's very easy to extrapolate this beyond simply the female guardian class in the way he takes it, and he's obviously positioning it as something that is against common practice.
Yes, I mean, look, I mean, in the conventional run-of-the-mill, presumably if women are fit to be guardians, then they're also fit for everything underneath that.
Right.
So nobody had a problem, I think, thinking that women were fit to be producers or were dominated by desire. The question really, I mean, whether they're in these other realms. So let's bring it back to Michelle's point then. Okay. So back here. What's, in terms of thinking about the three classes or the three individuals, Michelle, what's your best current understanding? I mean, what's your best understanding of this now, or what's the problem?
I mean, what's my problem?
Yeah, or what's the issue?
Look, let me ask you something before I go deeper into this. As this book evolves, are we going to have a discussion about how the worker class is supposed to operate?
Have you seen anything like that so far?
No, but I have not read the rest of the book.
No, right.
So that's a no.
You're asking me for a spoiler.
I mean, come on, this isn't a mystery, Actually, it kind of is, but I'm sorry, that didn't help me. I don't understand, I will say it again, how you can have moderation in the workers, regulating their desires without some form of teaching and some form of use of reason.
Maybe so, but I guess I'm not sure. Let's assume that that's true. What does that yield? What does that tell us? What does that do for us? Socrates, I mean, clearly the thing that they've been focusing on is the education of the warriors leading into the education of the guardians.
Right.
And isn't the goal of that for the guardian class to get the knowledge, which, as I read it, Socrates was suggesting is not attainable by the workers. And I think that's why the education would be wasted of the type, Michelle, I think you're talking about, on the working class, because they're not constituted in a way to accrue that benefit of knowledge, which seems to be the goal the guardians are striving for through their education.
But this first city, the good city, whether it's the aristocracy or a king, is composed of all of these essential parts. And in order for justice to prevail, there has to be balance in the society and there has to be balance in the individual. And what I'm saying is, I do not understand how there is balance to be acquired in the individual who is the worker. And I haven't heard anyone give me a good answer to the question. And if I'm supposed to just take it on faith that there will be moderation, I'm having a problem with that. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult. I just,
but I think you're
class two where I don't get it.
Patrick?
Yeah, well, moderation, that's a hard fit in that chart to me also. Moderation is a virtue though, and in the end of chapter or book 4, Socrates speaks about virtue being a product of the state of the soul, the beauty of the soul. So all those three things in the soul, wisdom and spirit and desire, have to blend together to create that moderation. So it has to be a balance between spirit and desire to get moderation and some element of wisdom. I know that next bottle is going to make me feel crappy in the morning, and then I need the heart to tell the desire to drink that bottle to shut up and put it down.
But is that Socrates speaking or Patrick speaking?
No, that's Socrates speaking, because his definition of virtue was the beauty and state of the soul. And the only way to get that is to have a balance of the three elements of the soul.
Steve? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I have a variation on Michelle's problem, so I'm going to expand the problem rather than
Good.
solve it.
Someone else should be a troublemaker around here. Very good, Steve. Go.
I think it bears some light on it, because I think you could make almost
You've lost control, Adam.
the same attack because moderation works its way up the food chain there. I think you could actually make the same entry point of how is this supposed to happen? You know, we've been focusing on justice is the residual. We defined justice, okay, in a way that I'm not sure any of us would have when the book started, which is part of the point, okay? But we defined it as an interrelation of three terms and a harmonization of three terms, none of which we defined a whole lot more closely than we actually defined their amalgam.
It's a byproduct.
It's a byproduct, okay? You know, I'm not sure if we dug into spiritedness, or at this point in the book, if we dug into spiritedness based on what we've learned so far, or even into higher level reason, whether we'd feel a whole lot more comfortable about whether there was actually any education, or what the education is that leads us to be able to say that's been developed. So again, this is expanding the problem, not reducing it. So the fact that there hasn't been any education pointed to moderation is an extreme example of the fact that we haven't defined the other two terms terribly closely, and we defined the fourth term as somehow a balance of three terms we haven't defined very closely.
Because, I mean, at one point, Socrates says that even in a perfect environment where everything's nurturing and completely prepared for things to go well, that doesn't mean that's going to happen. Right? So there's, I don't know, I understand what he's saying. I just don't think, it's not holding water for me on this one piece of that diagram.
Frank and then Diane.
So Michelle, do you understand how study of gymnastics and music
Frank.
brings about this ideal class of people in the world?
I can accept that part of it, actually.
Why?
Okay, hold on a second, Nick. Frank.
Are we supposed to harken back to the first city, that we didn't need war, we didn't need the auxiliaries, and assume that there wouldn't be justice there? There was supposed to be justice there, and I keep thinking we're supposed to end up with the city is the big version of the individual. So if we go back to the original city, like Michelle's saying, all those people have that potential, and we don't get any of the information about the need for the instruction of the guardians, but there's still justice.
We don't even need guardians, is the whole point, right?
Not in the perfect city, no.
Right.
The simple one.
So maybe everybody.
So maybe that's a sidebar.
Diane?
I'm wondering if it might be how they learn moderation, the workers. He's saying that, okay, they're in their soul, desire is what they deal with. And I remembered him talking about what is a just city, and that is everyone in that city has to mind his own business, that he does what he's assigned to do, each individual. And so the workers are to follow orders. And if they're in their soul, what's prominent is desire. In order to follow orders, they have to restrain their desires. And by doing so, they develop moderation. Just as the warrior class has to follow the orders of the ruler, and they face danger, so they develop courage, the virtue of courage, by following those orders. And
But they're receiving training to get there. You're saying that the worker is supposed to be able to rein in his own desires and be moderate in a vacuum just because.
I'm saying that he's learning by experience to moderate his desires because he's following orders. If he doesn't follow orders, he's not, if he's not restraining his desires, he's not following orders, and he's not minding his own business.
And the orders are those imposed by the guardians and the auxiliaries?
Correct.
That was one version of this that actually I thought was an option. So, but then, is that what you're suggesting?
That's the way I'm seeing it. If he's minding his own business, each of the lower classes has to follow the order of the higher classes. And he talks later, when they're talking about war, that they send young boys off to war to learn by experience. Their education is not through book learning or through gymnastics or through music. It's by observing, going off to war and watching through the experiences of the war, what's happening. So they're learning by being exposed to it.
Who's learning?
The young boys who go off to war.
What young boys?
The children of the gold souled or the silver souled who go off to war.
You're saying gold boys and silver boys are going to watch the war to learn by imitation.
The silver.
Yes?
The silver?
Well, I mean, I'm asking you, what are you saying?
I guess the silver, the sons of the warriors.
Okay, but not the bronze boys.
No, they stay and they're the workers.
I mean, this is a caste system. So if we're going to talk, there's not just the generic youth, I don't think. There's bronze youth, silver youth, and gold youth. And the issue of how each of those type of youth is raised to become bronze, silver, and gold adults. And I mean, Michelle, I on the one hand, I'm sympathetic, and on the other hand, less so. I mean, because it seems to me the one answer is that apparently Socrates doesn't care.
Well, he may not care, but if he doesn't care, then he's not attaining that #1 category of city, Adam. Because you got to have the workers being moderate in order for this to be working the way it's supposed to. And I don't see how you get there.
That may be, but I'm saying that it's clear that Socrates and company have devoted a lot of attention to all kinds of subject matters, but one thing they haven't devoted time and attention to is the thing that's exercising you, and that's fair enough. But I think, so one is, I mean, unless I missed it, I mean, if there's some place where Socrates does talk about the cultivation of the workers, but I think it turns out that it's not, either it's not interesting or it's not relevant or it's just assumed that whatever it may be. And I think part of this, it may also be this, the red herring of the word virtue. And I tried this once before, but I got shot down, but I'm gonna try it one more time. Which is, instead of thinking about the word virtue as virtue, I mean, it's just like when we did Aristotle or something, to think about this as excellence. And that each part of the soul has a corresponding excellence, just in principle. That reason as reason is neither here nor there, but when reason becomes excellent, it becomes wisdom. And that spirit by itself is neither here nor there, but when spirit is cultivated to excellence, it becomes courage. And same for desire, if we follow this, that desire by itself is neither here nor there, but when it's cultivated to excellence, and I realize that may sound counterintuitive, but if we're using by analogy, that when desire is cultivated to excellence, it's called moderation. And that apparently different types of persons only have certain types of excellence available to them in principle. This is not all men are created equal. This is not every, I mean, and so, and part of the answer, I think, to your concern, Michelle, may be, it may be, and they haven't said this as far as I know, It may be that workers are not even capable of having justice within them. I mean, it would be justice if they had the three parts of their soul in harmony. It may be that they're not even capable of that. It might be that the warriors are not even capable of harmonizing, because the question becomes, where does that harmony, from Socrates' point of view, where does the harmony come from?
Okay, so going to Patrick's point, if we're in that perfect pre-world, the first one, where there are no auxiliaries,
The healthy
and
city.
there are no,
The healthy city.
I'm sorry?
The healthy city, before the dessert.
We are living in the healthy city.
Yes.
The healthy city doesn't have a caste system. And I don't know if we ever answered this, but does justice live in a perfect city?
Hold up, Michelle. Just dial the indignation down a notch,
It
okay?
just doesn't make, all right.
But what is the, I tried this one before. What is the life of the guardian class in the city that's been this, what's their life like, Michelle?
They have no possessions. They have no ties to anything that will get in the way of living life in such a manner as to be role models for everyone else.
And are we supposed to understand that the guardian class itself is a little just micro society?
Yes.
And that they're happy and whatever, the guardians are happy? Michelle?
Oh, Adam, I don't even want to start with this because you're going to, no, the women guardians that have their children taken away are not happy.
According to Socrates.
I know.
No, look.
Yes, they are having an idyllic existence.
Well,
they are at peace. They are balanced human beings.
Michelle, here, look. Just then, is it fair to say that the guardian subcommunity is in fact virtually identical to the healthy city that was described at the beginning of the whole republic?
I don't know.
Well, I'd like to consider that possibility. That whether, so if we follow the bouncing ball, remember, I mean, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but the Thrasimikian challenge, that it's better for a man to be just, even though he's perceived to be unjust, is better than to actually be unjust, even though you're perceived to be just. And
Right.
this is Socrates has taken this, and in order to do this, why don't we use a technical aid? Look at the big letters instead of the little letters. Let's look at the city instead of the individual. Be easier to see what we're looking for. And in order to see what we're looking for, let's do the thought experiment by tracing out the evolution of the city and see the moment that justice and injustice emerge. Socrates traces that out. People come together because of their mutual need, specialization, division of labor, until they get to the point where everybody is having all their needs met and they're drinking acorn wine or whatever the hell it is. And Socrates said, we're done here. And then Glaucon, I think, is like, but what about dessert? What about the relishes? What about the couches? Socrates says, oh, okay, maybe we should continue to develop the fevered city. And they go through this whole thing, and then we get the whole thing, more leads to war. Then we need a warrior class. Well, once we have a warrior class, we got a new problem, which is who's going to guard the guardians. So we have to figure out how to educate the guardians so that they're self-governing and they only bite the right people, so to speak, which led them into the whole discussion of education. And then once they got to the whole thing of education, maybe there's going to be some educational superstars who are really going to set themselves apart from the other warriors. And like these ones with the brainiacs are going to become the real guardians, right? Compared to, and then we don't want the guardians to have private interests. We want them to be strictly concerned with the public good. I mean, I take it this is the course that we've gone around. And when people keep saying, I mean, this is why I think it's interesting, whether or not Socrates claims to be describing the ideal city. Whether the whole thing started because this is a fevered city, and on the one hand, it becomes the ideal fevered city, which may not be the ideal city per se, but it may be the ideal fevered city. And that there's one component of the ideal fevered city that really may be the healthy city in microcosm. And that it may be that the other two classes are not capable, in principle, of realizing themselves as harmonious individuals because they're missing the key. And so I would turn it back on you, Michelle, as whether or not implicitly the healthy city at the beginning was like, I don't know, the Rousseau, the noble, like everybody was a guardian in the healthy city, naturally in some way.
I think that's right. That works.
But in the fevered city, the actual workers are not healthy and happy because they're not complete human beings, I presume. And the warriors are not complete human beings. That apparently only the guardians are in fact complete human beings. And then to go back to your, presumably then, the complete human beings are responsible for filling in the gaps in the incomplete human beings. I mean, the only way a worker is going to end up with inner harmony, I take it, is if some external agent tells him how to do it. It's not about educating the worker. It's about micromanaging the worker. Or even the warrior can be educated to certain things, but not. I mean, if we really take the fact that, let's put the chart back up, that really there's only one subgroup that is capable of reason in a serious way.
Because this makes total sense, because once people fall out of that ideal city that relies on people only having what's essential, that it fractures the society and it necessitates a division with an allocation that results in inequities in order to keep the civilization intact. It actually, that just made total sense to me, Adam.
So can you just restate in your own words, I'm not playing you here. In your own words, restate what is the thing that makes sense now that didn't make sense 5 minutes ago?
What makes sense now to me is that everything that Socrates has devised in this perfectly ideal fevered city, basically that there's a price that gets paid once you walk away from that initial idyllic city where
Let's use this word, let's call it the healthy city, the healthy city.
Once you abandon the healthy city, once the people abandon the healthy city, the best that you can hope for is to have a small minority of that original population later find themselves restored to sort of that position that the whole community would have partaken of previously.
And
by necessity.
And if I can go back to the other chart now, that whether this means actually the kind of regime where the whole community is governed by the good people, the healthy people. And there's many other ways of organizing, or at least 4 other ways of organizing a city, but this one is organizing it where the rules, the direction, the instructions, the leadership comes from the good people, the healthy people.
So 99% of the population is unjust because their souls can never be balanced. And we've got
Say
Mitt
it like
Romney
say it like you
at the
believe it.
top. What's that?
Say it like you believe it instead of with a sing-songy voice. 90%, 99% of the population, say it like you believe it. Just
But,
pretend.
well, it's probably true, but it doesn't seem to.
Well, say it one more time, please.
So 99% of the population is unjust. It doesn't seem to promote a very stable city because now.
Let's go even further. It may be that 99% of the population is constitutionally incapable of being just. It's not even because they don't want to be. It may be that 99% is constitutionally incapable of being just. They don't have the raw material that would make it possible.
Then how are they going to mind their own business?
But whether they can take instructions. What?
But
I don't know. You look like you're praying or thinking about something.
oh no. I mean, I think what part of what you're saying when I looked at page 109 and 110, I think that that's what Socrates is saying here. What you just described.
109.
109. You have to start at around 430, a little bit after E, where it says moderation.
Yes.
And then it goes all the way to 431B. But if you read through that, essentially what it's saying is what you're saying is that, you know, moderation is something that the multitude do not have, only a few have. And in order for the city to achieve harmony, what happens is that moderation, he says that it actually stretches throughout the whole city. So it goes from the top, because those people, the rulers are the most prudent and the most moderate because they're ruled by calculation, and it stretches to the bottom, and that it's this harmonizing that moderation does, that it allows for an accord of worse and better, he says, and unanimity within the city. So I think this is pretty much what you're saying, that moderation is not something available, probably, maybe it's not 99%, but at least 90%. And but by the mixing of it, what we end up having in the city is the justice and the harmony that's required for the city to be able to the different members of the city to coexist.
And if I just go back to the chart, and then Patrick, you're going to have to put some words on those faces, because that's just like a real animation of like. But if you take what Nancy, what you just said, and now apply it to the individual.
Yes.
I take it that the stomach, you know, what Amy, the stomach by itself is not capable of justice or moderation on its own accord, that the stomach just wants more. Ooh, you know, desires just want, you know, it's only for those cases where there's a head attached to a stomach, where there's reason coming from some other place that can provide that external leadership, if you want to call it that, or rulership to the stomach that could cause somebody to have that kind of, I mean, you could turn it around. Like, what's a glutton? A glutton is a stomach not attached to a head. Patrick.
Yeah, I don't get confused.
Wait, hold on one second. But Patrick, you just put some words to that animated face.
You know, it's just that when you show that moderation and desire as independent entities, it just seems like desire, unchecked by any other part of the soul or any other virtue, is the antithesis of moderation.
No, moderation is that part of the soul, when it becomes excellent, is called moderate.
When the person becomes
When that part of the soul becomes excellent.
Okay, so you're taking virtue out of there and just using the word excellent.
Well, I think it will help, but it's just like, what's the relationship between, I mean, I'm really trying to do nothing more than be like a computer here, which is, what's the relationship between reason and wisdom? What's the relationship between spirit and courage? And whatever that is, presumably stands in the same relation as desire and moderation. I mean, that seems to be the analogy that's being laid out here.
Can I ask one more?
One second.
Well, hold on, wait a minute, just Patrick first, and then Yossi, and then Michelle.
Okay.
Wait, Patrick, just finish. So is that?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm just having a hard time with it. I don't know how you get moderation from desire without any other external factors, whether it's from your own soul or from, somebody else might be forcing you, but that's not.
It's the same problem with courage. How is spirit turned into courage, or how is reason turned into wisdom?
Yeah, but they have a certain intuitive appeal. The desire to moderation doesn't have an intuitive road to drive down here.
Okay, Yossi?
Adam, please put the table back, the chart.
Okay.
And in the I tell you, I think the confusion, if you put the chart back in place, and you go back to 432A, where they say moderation doesn't work that way, but actually it stretches for the whole from top to bottom. So if you look in the, when you put in the chart moderation at the bottom, it's really you need to show like an arrow going up
here
and
it is
down.
here and here also. Yes, yes.
Because it's confusion. People, I think that the moderation is only for the lower section, only for the workers.
It's not that it's only for them, it's the only excellence of which they are in fact capable.
But from the other end, we know from what he says here that the moderation is also for the warriors and for the rulers.
Yes,
Everybody.
we're in agreement. The chart, we fixed this last time so that the workers are capable of only one excellence, moderation. The warriors are capable of two excellences, moderation and courage. And the guardians are capable of three excellences, moderation, courage, and wisdom. And so, I mean, by its very nature, so it's what's distinctive about the workers.
If you make a arrow up and down on the last one, it will help, I think.
I can, if we would make it as a, yes, we could make the chart like with
an arrow up and down.
Color. Whoops. We make it as a color that the workers are like that. Sorry, it goes like that, and then this one is for these two, and this one is just for them. So I mean, I think we're saying the same thing here.
Okay.
All right, Steve.
It occurs to me that part of the discussion we're having about the difference between the attribute and the virtue or excellence is a little bit of a me-no kind of question. How do you get from A to B? And the answer is you can get from A to B because you experience over time and you experience things. You can get it because you do things, or you can get it because you're told to do things. Some combination of the above.
That's knowledge.
Right. Well, I mean, you get from the knowledge to, I mean, get it in a couple of different ways, but the transition, whatever we're going to call that, can happen in a number of paths. They spend a lot of time talking about one particular path, which is the education path, which gets the warriors from spirit to courage. We haven't talked a lot about how wisdom gets created at the higher levels. And to Michelle's point, really haven't talked at all about how you get from desire to moderation. it may be, again, that you have some sort of, intermixing of those three, told to learn it on my own and have specific education that gets there. But it just occurred to me that's exactly what, or that's a large part what Menno was about, at least what I remember Menno being about.
So we get just a few minutes left, and I want to shift, even though, obviously we're not done with this in a final way. But if we could go to page 152, 472C. And so just to, again, keep the story coherent, that up until this point, I think, the way we've been saying it now, that Socrates and company have been sketching out the kind of ideal fevered city, given the fact that we rushed past the healthy city way back when, all right? And then Socrates wants to talk about the 5 types of regime and the 5 types of soul, and we got into the sidebar about what about the women, right? And now there's this other kind of sidebar. And at 472C, Socrates says, "It was therefore for the sake of a pattern, I said, that we were seeking both for what justice by itself is like, and for the perfectly just man, if he should come into being, and what he would be like once come into being, and in their turns for injustice and the most unjust man. Thus, looking off at what their relationships to happiness and its opposite appear to us to be, we would also be compelled to agree in our own cases that the man who is most like them will have the portion most like theirs. We were not seeking them for the sake of proving that it's possible for these things to come into being." "What you say is true," he said. "Do you suppose a painter is any less good who draws a pattern of what the fairest human being would be like and renders everything in the picture adequately, but can't prove that it's also possible that such a man come into being?" "No, by Zeus, I don't," he said. "Then what about this? Weren't we, as we assert, also making a pattern in speech of a good city?" "Certainly. Do you suppose that what we say is any less good on account of our not being able to prove that it is possible to found a city the same as the one in speech?" "Surely not," he said. "Well, then, that's the truth of it," I said. "But if then to gratify you, I must also strive to prove how and under what condition it would be most possible, grant me the same points again for this proof." "What points?" "Can anything be done as it is said? Or is it the nature of acting to attain to less truth than speaking, even if someone doesn't think so? Do you agree that it's so or not?" "I do agree," he said. "Then don't compel me necessarily to present it as coming into being in every way indeed as we described it in speech. But if we are able to find that a city could be governed in a way most closely approximating what has been said, say that we found the possibility of these things coming into being on which you insist. Or won't you be content if it turns out this way? I, for my part, would be content." "I would too," he said. "So next, as it seems, we must try to seek out and demonstrate what is done badly in cities today, and thereby keeps them from being governed in this way, and with what smallest change, preferably one, if not two, and if not, the fewest in number and the smallest in power, a city would come to this manner of regime." "That's entirely certain," he said. "Well then," I said, "with one change. Not, however, a small or an easy one, but possible. We can, in my opinion, show that it would be transformed. What change, he said. Well, here I am, I said, coming to what we likened to the biggest wave. But it shall be said regardless, even if, exactly like an uproarious wave, it's going to drown me in laughter and ill repute. Consider what I am going to say. Speak, he said. Unless, I said, the philosophers rule as kings, or those now called kings and chiefs genuinely and adequately philosophize, and political power and philosophy coincide in the same place, while the many natures now making their way to either apart from the other are by necessity excluded. There is no rest from ills for the cities, my dear Glaucon, nor I think for humankind, nor will the regime we have now described in speech ever come forth from nature, insofar as possible, and see the light of the sun. This is what for so long was causing my hesitation to speak, seeing how very paradoxical it would be to say. For it is hard to see that in no other city would there be private or public happiness. And we're just out of time, so we'll have to pick the conversation up here next time. But I would just like to, the point being is that everything that they've been discussing up to this point, as Socrates, this is all theory. And the question arises whether or not there's any practical application of all this theory. And the question then is, what is the closest approximation in the real world? What would be the easiest way, the cheapest way to get there? The smallest number of variables. And Socrates says, we could get to some reasonable approximation of this city by changing just one thing. And that is putting political power and wisdom in the same place. Either make the rulers philosophers or make the philosophers rulers. And that would get us to some approximation of the ideal fevered city on earth. So I'll tell you what, let's leave it there. We'll come back, we'll start with this next time. Also, obviously we'll go into book 6 and carry this all along down the road. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.